It's been 8 years since Atlus launched their mega hit RPG Persona 5, and since then the team behind Persona 5 as well as 3, 4, and Catherine created their own studio under the Atlus umbrella called Studio Zero. The goal was to create an original game with their own unique spin on the fantasy genre. Previously known as Project ReFantazio, Metaphor ReFantazio is finally available worldwide, and let me tell you, it's incredible and totally worth the wait. And special thanks to Atlus for sponsoring this video. To order your own copy today, be sure to click the link in the pinned comment or in the description below.
Now, onward.
Fantasy stories have always been used as a tool to tell stories addressing issues in modern-day society, and Metaphor is no different. From the opening minutes of the game, it's clear that this game is diving headfirst into big issues like injustice, discrimination, and class inequality. And this begins with you, the main character. They're from a lonely tribe known as the Elda. You're constantly being reminded of this not only through in-game story dialogue, but also just little murmurs as you're walking around the city. From the opening cinematic through dozens of hours into the game, Metaphor does an absolutely incredible job of world building. You get a true sense of what this world is like not only through the story cutscenes, but also gameplay. But the main driving force of Metaphor's story is the royal tournament for the throne. The king is dead, the prince is assumed dead, and no one else is in line to take the throne. So this royal tournament is set up, and anyone that wants to throw their hat in the ring to become the next king can do so. With the support of your crew, you enter the tournament and try to win the crown. But this won't be easy. Not only can anyone throw their hat in the ring, so you have a lot of other people to compete against, but the initial frontrunners are people with high political power and will pull the strings from behind the scenes to do whatever they can to win. So throughout your story, you're going to be journeying across the world, completing tasks and also trying to win the favor of the people. This can be done through tasks like buying items from a local shop for people that can't afford those items to hunting down monsters. I have to say, from the opening cutscene, this game hooks you right away. There's so much intrigue with what's going on and how all the character relationships intertwine that you just can't help but want to keep playing to figure out what happens next. And as you get to know the other contestants and as more characters join your crew, the story only continues to get more epic. My favorite crew member probably has to be Stroll. He's a warrior from the Clamar tribe that you meet early in the game. He hails from a noble family and has a strong sense of justice. He's always trying to help out the little guy, but also has a bit of a chip on his shoulder for a reason that I won't spoil here. Everyone's also really well voiced with strong performances across the board. Most characters have a bit of a European accent to them, which I love. It was always really fun to meet new characters and see what kind of accent they had. And much like Persona's social link system, Metaphor has its own version of that called bonds, and they work in a very similar way. There will be times throughout the game where you can spend time with your crew members or other characters throughout the world, and the better you get to know them, the more your bond level will increase and they'll gain new abilities that will be helpful to you. Not to mention, you'll get to know these characters better through these bond events. Speaking of Persona, if you enjoyed Persona 3, 4, and 5's game loop, then you're gonna love what Metaphor has in store for you.
There's no time for prayers.
After watching the initial reveal trailer for Metaphor, I pretty much went on media blackout. Persona is my favorite franchise in gaming, and I knew whatever the team behind those last 3 entries was making was going to be amazing, so I didn't want to be spoiled on anything. To my surprise, Metaphor plays way more like a modern Persona game than I ever expected. The game works on a calendar system, there's a bonding system between characters, there are character virtues that you need to level up, there's a new iteration of the turn-based combat system, and so much more. Much like the modern Persona games, something will happen in the story and you have a set number of days to stop it or make sure something gets completed. Typically, this involves going through a dungeon and beating a boss at the end. Players of Persona 5 will find certain aspects of dungeons very similar. For example, you have these sort of safe rooms that once you get to, you can then continue exploring from those safe rooms if you decide to leave the dungeon and then come back later. I don't know how you typically played Persona games, but usually I can get through the dungeons in a few days, maybe 3 if they were really long. I always liked finishing them as fast as I could so I could interact with the social aspects of the gameplay. That's still the case with Metaphor. However, the dungeons here feel much bigger and take much longer to complete. Depending on your party setup, this usually comes down to MP because MP comes at a premium. I ended up using a lot of it with my party setup, and items that restored MP were pretty rare, so I couldn't just use them to restore my MP and keep going. I didn't really mind this though, because after the dungeon, what I came to understand is that party setup is critical and you'll need to experiment a lot, and you're able to do this through the brilliant archetype system. Archetypes are Metaphor's version of job classes. As you add new characters to your party or increase bonds with your followers, you can unlock new archetypes. These range from your typical fantasy classes like mage, warrior, knight, healer, etc. As you fight battles, you'll not only get experience for your character levels, but also for your archetype levels. And as your archetypes level up, you'll unlock new skills. And the more you level up your archetypes, you can eventually acquire even stronger ones. And what I love about this system is that it's really flexible. It's not like one archetype can only be used by one character at a time. You can have a full team of warriors if you wanted to, but I wouldn't suggest that. What's cool is when your characters try different classes, you can sort of mix and match them together. You're able to inherit abilities from other archetypes that you've already unlocked. For example, if Stroll unlocked a healing spell with the healer class, he could then equip that healing spell onto his knight archetype. So depending on what the situation calls for, you can adjust accordingly. For example, early on there's a side quest that you can do, and the final boss in the dungeon will do much more powerful moves if you either have a healer or a mage in your party. So you're forced to try different archetypes if you've been using casters. Depending on your combination of archetypes in your party, you can also perform synthesis moves. Essentially, two party members combine their abilities into one big attack. These can be anything from a multi-hit spell to a melee attack that reduces an enemy's defense. It was really cool mixing and matching archetypes to see what these synthesis abilities would be, and I highly encourage you to do the same. As you level up your archetypes and forge stronger bonds with your characters, you can unlock even more powerful archetypes. I love how every system in the game weaves in and out within itself to create a really addictive game loop. Hours would fly by and I often found myself losing track of time. Now let's talk about the combat system. It's similar in a lot of ways to the modern Persona and SMT games, but it has its own unique quirks. You can have a party of up to 4 characters that you can fully control. This all plays out in dynamic turn-based fashion. When your turn begins, you'll see these crystals at the top of the menu, each representing a turn for each one of your characters. However, if you land a critical hit or hit an enemy's weakness, you'll only use up half a crystal, essentially granting you an extra turn. So obviously it's in your best interest to try to exploit each enemy's weakness to make combat as easy as possible. However, if you miss an attack, you'll end up losing 2 crystals instead of just 1. But you'll need to be careful because all the same principles here apply to the enemy. Now I'm sure you've seen in the trailers or other gameplay videos that there's an action aspect to the combat. Basically, if an enemy is a low enough level, you can just run up and hit them and beat them in one hit. I love this because it just makes it way more efficient. It's a great solution for allowing you to defeat lower level enemies quickly without wasting your time. What's really wild is if you mess up a battle, you can actually restart the battle from the very beginning and try it again. Again, just another great quality of life feature that saves you from wasting your time. Next, let's talk about the boss battles because they are challenging and epic. You can't simply mindlessly spam your strongest attack with the bosses. Oh no. You need to test and see what their unique gimmick is and think of a clever solution to try to combat it. For example, you have one boss that's constantly spawning new enemies that you need to take care of before they totally overwhelm you, or another that has multiple body parts that heals itself. You might even have to quit the battle to reconfigure your team's archetype loadout if the one you came in with wasn't good enough. I played on normal and felt the challenge was quite solid, never too easy or too overwhelming, simply a good balance. Now I couldn't properly talk about Metaphor without discussing the game's presentation because my god, it's on a level all its own. Persona 5 redefined what menus and UI could be in a video game, and Metaphor takes that design philosophy and keeps running with it. If you've been watching any of this video, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Everything from the pause menu to the combat to simply running around the world, all of it has unique, gorgeous flourishes oozing from every corner. Admittedly, when I first started playing the game, I felt really overstimulated, particularly in combat. Every little action you do is accompanied by some flashy UI animation and screen transition. I felt like my eyes never had a moment to rest. However, after putting dozens of hours into the game, I got a lot more used to it, and I've really come to appreciate this bold design. I also really love the art style for the character portraits. It's really hard to put into words, but there's something about it that's just so unique and striking. Whenever I met a new character and got to see their character portrait, I just loved soaking up every little brushstroke and splash of color in their design. In a time for games where it seems like everything's been done before and nothing new can be created, Metaphor boldly stands out from the crowd with one of the most unique art styles in any game I've ever played. The music of Metaphor is also amazing. A complete departure from the acid jazz the Persona series is known for, composer Shoji Meguro has given this soundtrack a much more traditional fantasy feel, yet it still manages to be bold and striking in its own way. The music's use of trumpets and choir vocals leave a strong impression, particularly in combat. However, Meguro is able to strike a fine balance with more lighthearted and whimsical tracks where appropriate. This soundtrack is a powerful one and will likely stick with you long after the credits roll. Atlus has hit it out of the park yet again with Metaphor ReFantazio. Its new iteration of the addictive Persona game loop told through the lens of a fantasy world is a wonder to behold. Every game system has been thoughtfully woven together, each story beat powerfully told, and each aspect of the presentation is bold and fresh. 2024 already has a lot of strong competition for Game of the Year, and Metaphor has easily catapulted itself to the top of that list. Currently, it sits at an astonishing 93 on Metacritic, one of the highest scores of the year. Simply put, if you enjoy RPGs, Metaphor ReFantazio should absolutely not be missed. Once again, thank you to Atlus for sponsoring this video. Be sure to order your copy today from the links in the pinned comment or description below.